So to do the background, we need to wet down our background first with clear water. I am using a large size. It is about 1 inch flat brush, and I am wetting down entire background, and I am not going close to the flower. If I go close to the flower, I am using the edge of my brush. You can use a tiny brush also, a small sized brush, if you are going close to the flower. So having my background completely wet will allow me to put in the colors easily. I have also mixed a watery consistency of my color. I am using red color for the first layer of the background. It is maroonish actually, but once it spreads along with the background water, it will look reddish to us. Don't go inside the flower petals with any amount of water, because wherever the water flows, the paint will flow in. So you can make a mix like this, a thin mix, which is what I have here now. A lot of water is there on my paper, so it will not form any streaks unless and until I want it. Now I don't want this water to dry before, that's why I am pouring in the paint on the wet background. There's a lot of wetness on the background right now. I am tilting my paper and allowing the water to run and mix the color on the paper by itself. I am not using a lot of brush right now. You see my paper is curving a bit. It indicates the amount of water which is there, which is a lot of water. Right now I am being relatively intuitive about where to put my colors. If you have already painted backgrounds, you can do the same, or you can follow what I am doing. Now the entire background is complete. In order to go towards my flower petals, I will be using the small of the brush, which is a side of that flat brush. However, if you find it difficult, use any small size brush which you are comfortable with to draw in little amounts of color towards your petals. Be careful, we don't have to go inside the flower. In case you go inside the flower, just quickly lift it with a tissue paper. In this video, I have already used these brushes which I am showing you. Sorry, the camera is shaking a bit because I chose this brush to move my paint closer to the petals. You can choose any brush which you have, which has smaller bristles. A pointed bristle will help because we have to go inside towards the flower petals. And yes, all this time your paper has to be wet. Initially when I wet down the paper, I wetted it very thoroughly, nicely, and that's why I can do it. That's why I can help the brush to move the water here and there. If I don't water down my paper well, I can't do this at this stage if it is drying up. If it is drying up, you need to use your hair dryer, dry the entire thing, re-wet this area, whole area again, and then do it. Once I complete doing this part, I will allow it to dry. So at 7 minutes of this video, I have already completed around 7 minutes. I have completed the first wash, first layer of the background, and I allowed it to dry for next 4-5 hours. After that, I have started the next layer. Now I leave it to dry. I'm just taking up all the water because as the paper dries up, this water can go inside and create a bloom which I don't want. And you can also notice water puddles forming anywhere on the paper, and using a dry brush, lift it up. Once you've lifted it, dry your brush on a tissue paper. So this is my first round. Once it is dry, I'm wetting it again after a gap of 5 hours. You can allow it a lot many hours more than that. You can come over the next day also, but minimum 5 hours of gap is required so that the paint can settle in. Then you wet it with clear water like I just did. Today I have made this puddle here in this bowl because I am going in with a darker mix. Darker mix of the same color. I had this color, so I used it. I have wet down this entire section, and be careful when you are going around your flower. You can use a small brush also. I am trying to use the tip of the brush and I don't want to go very close to it. If you had observed, around where I had put in the color, I did not mix it, but because of the water, that color has dragged itself down to wherever the water is. The amount of water should be adequate for the paint to flow on the paper nicely, but do not allow the paint to form any puddles. If there is a puddle formation that you can see, Remove it using dry brush. Dry your brush on a tissue paper and soak up that excess paint. Once soaked, you can again wipe off your brush on a damp cloth or tissue paper. You see again my paper is tilting, the side which I have wet down. It shows a lot of water is there. Also, if you do not have 300 GSM paper, it may not be able to tolerate that much water. Bear that in mind, and if you're doing backgrounds, then do it on a good paper. Backgrounds with many layers. I am allowing the paint to mix on the paper by tilting my painting from one side to the other, and when I see that the paint has relatively rested on that paper, am I wetting the other side of the flower? It is just plain water with which I am wetting it down. I am trying to be careful not to go inside any of the petals. When you are close to the petals, you can use a smaller brush. Right now, I am not using it, but I have showed you previously. Now about 16.5 minutes I will have finished this layer of painting, and I will be doing the third layer of painting. That is after I have allowed it to dry for the next 5-6 hours or maybe an entire day. So in order to go around my petals, I am using a tiny brush. And because these areas also need to darken, I am using the color from my mix. My entire paper is pretty wet right now, so I can use the darker mix which I have prepared. You can see the color lightening as I move from one area to another because there is water on the paper. I'm thinking of creating some light streaks on the background, like verticals. That's why I put in this color over here and allowing it to move vertically. Look, because there was water on my paper, so when I put in the color, it spread on its own wherever the water was. And I will have to correct some of these petal edges. But since I will be doing one or two more layers on it, that is at about 16 and a half, I will leave this to dry once I complete this background. And about 16 and a half I have left it to dry for a day, and then I have come back to it with the third layer at 16 and a half minutes. The way I am going this side is exactly the way I will go on the other side of the flower. Now this is the third layer on the background, and once it was bone dry, after a day I have come back and I have made a video and I added it to the previous one. So what I'm doing is I'm not wetting the background. I have made a lot of paint mixed with water, and I am directly using that paint on the background. While doing this, I do not want my boundary line wherever the edge of this mix is to dry up ever. If I allow it to dry up, that is, if it goes unnoticed, then it will create a hard edge. So be careful when you're doing this kind of layering of your background, doing your background, because you don't want any hard edge to be forming. Look, I'm not allowing any of the edges to dry up, and I'm going quickly, relatively quickly, because I have mixed a lot of paint with and I'm using a bigger brush. The paper is now bending a bit towards the edges, towards its edges. But this is how you will do it, and when you will go towards the petals, you will use a smaller brush. Once this layer is done, I will again allow it to dry for entire day. Once it dries for an entire day, I'm thinking of using a darker color. I think bluish color I will use to darken the background. Even though I can see quite dark, it's not how it's looking relatively less dark on the screen. Let me know if you have any questions. Also, we will darken the flower once our background is complete, after my blue layer is done. Now, having done my background, I have been coloring my foreground, which is the flower, and I have been darkening the values of my flower. This is what I'm continuing to do. This is a slow process because you have to go according to the background as well as look at your image. I have my image right in front of me. Also, I have it open on my mobile phone. So this is a slow process. We cannot go very fast over here so that we can maintain the value differences on the entire flower. So depending upon how dark the background is, I am trying to adjust the colors. I hardly have any water in my palette. This very little water, there is enough only to spread the color at places where I want to. This will take us some time because we need a re-look at everything on each of the petals of the flower.